Well, good afternoon, everybody, and good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world, and whenever that you're watching this video, and welcome to the Buddhist Biohacker channel. Our commitment is to create conscious content for 1111D, and this is our 64th episode since April 1st. And Julie Hoyle was our very first episode, really, when we talked about dancing with the shadow all that time ago, which feels a lot longer than it is in linear time. And so welcome in. This is a very special episode. We have started a new program called our monthly features, and really it's all about integration. And last week there was in fact a hurricane, so we were cut short. And so we're back again today with the incredible and beautiful Julie Hoyle. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's such a thrill to be here. And especially it's a thrill not to have a hurricane pounding on our doors. So it's a joy. So I'm really looking forward to diving back into this very meaty theme of meeting the shadow, and also, talking about the awakening process, what that looks and feels like, meeting the shadow, recognizing what the shadow is, and then essentially ending the search. So I'm really looking forward to hearing some of the questions that were sent in to you. I know you've received some of those this week, Lisa.
Yes.
To also see some of the questions on the live stream. And then I've received a couple of questions as well that I would love to, speak to and speak about. So we'll just, have this lovely dance and a playful time of just looking and seeing what's coming up for everybody.
I love it. And I just want to welcome everybody who's coming in. I see you guys joining in the live. This is all about you today. So you can ask any questions that you have or share any stories, anything that you want to share in the live chat box to the right, which I think is my left on YouTube. So you guys can put your questions and comments in there for everybody who's watching in the live. So yeah, do you want to dive in? What do you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with your questions if you have a list of questions, and then I can refer to some of the questions I have, and then we'll see how that plays out.
Perfect. All right. Well, I'm going to pull those up. I have definitely gotten a list of questions for you. And one of the first questions that I have here, sorry, I'm just pulling up my little list, is how do you know that it's time to work on your shadow? I thought that was a really good question.
That is a really great question. The thing in my own, and I can speak from my own direct experience, is that it really hit me full in the face. I had no choice but to look at what I was being shown, because I felt it. Not only did I see it, in terms of, just perceiving it and seeing it and hearing it, but I felt it physically as well, because it was so strong. But certainly another way, if you don't have a direct experience of that, one clear way or one clear indicator of seeing really it's time to start working on the shadow is when you felt like you've been just going round and round and round the same grooves with respect to doing the same practices in meditation and maybe chanting or hatha yoga. And, maybe having some really blissful, beautiful, expansive experiences, maybe having lucid dreams, maybe having visions or insights and intuitions, all those lovely, lovely, lovely things. And obviously being very grateful for those, but at the same time, not being able to stay in a joyful, kind of even, loving, expansive space. If you feel like you're moving between these kind of bliss-filled, euphoric states of being after doing the practices, but then you fall into some irritation or frustration, or, you feel stuck or you feel angry about something, or whatever the story is, then you really know that it's time to do the work on the shadow. And, you know, as I mentioned in the book, and I know this is true with everybody who's listening, we all know many, many people that have been on a spiritual path for many years, and it's clear that they still have anger issues, they get frustrated, they manipulate, or whatever the story is around that, and that the shadow really has not been dealt with. So, you know, all of those things will start to become very clear, and that's when we know it's really time to start looking at the shadow and working with it. You know, and also in that same kind of directive, it's important to not just read about the shadow and know about it, but to actually do the work, to dive in and keep doing the work until you feel like you've resolved it or you've gotten to the end of it. In terms of the big issues, the fiery issues, the pointers or the experiences that will really bring up, you know, tremendous disturbance within you.
Yeah, and that is actually a really great segue, because another one of the questions that was mailed in is, how do you know when you're done with the shadow, and are you ever done? That's
great. Well, the answer to that is yes and no. You know, you do get to a point where you really are done with what I would call the kind of the tripping points, or the kind of obstacle areas, or the areas that you're really repressing and pulling away from. You know, you'll work through those up to a certain point, and then there's just, for me again, it was I had a lucid dream where I was following one of the masters through this very dark cave, and we were going around all these obstacles. And then I saw a light up at the end of the dark tunnel. And then I heard the message, you're coming to the end of the shadow work. And, you know, although I realized that, you know, there was truth in that, and that was really a clear indicator of the work that had been done, I also really knew deep in that the shadow isn't going to go anywhere. You know, where there's light, there's shadow. And there will always be shadow aspects that show themselves, but they don't create disturbance or difficulty in them, in us. And again, in the book, I speak to this because I speak about, you know, my lovely husband, Tony, who often points things out to me. Whereas, you know, before I would be in denial or didn't want to see it or didn't want to speak about it. Now I just laugh because it's so hilarious, because I know that what he's saying is true. And it's, you know, it's not huge things. Again, as I point out in the book, it's about, you know, putting cups back in the cupboard that's like all over the place. Whereas I used to be really anal about everything, and it's like we switched roles. But, you know, it just becomes very playful, very funny, because it's like a friend, or it's like a child sometimes as well. You know, a child does something that, you know, it could be annoying, but then you just kind of laugh at it because, you know, it just becomes amusing. So that's essentially the way it works, because the thing is that until we really start working with the energy of the shadow, our own shadow, it's nobody else's, it belongs to us, we will really miss out on all the wonderful wisdom and the amazing lessons it has to teach us, and the beautiful things it has to point out to us. Because, you know, again, it's not all about the negative. It's often about, as was in my case, again, my creative energy, my creative talents were hidden in the shadow. And it was really no coincidence that the moment I actually started engaging with that, from the very beginning, actually, it wasn't, you know, like 10 years on or 5 years on or whatever. From the very beginning, I had this drive to write and to explore different facets of my creativity and do things I would never have dreamt of doing before. And it's that accessible. It's not that you have to, you know, be digging away for a long period of time. It becomes, the energy of it becomes available to us. And I'm sure you can speak about this as well, Lisa. You've probably done things that you would never dreamed of doing prior to engaging in the shadow work.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, for everybody who's listening who thinks, well, I don't know if I'll ever get there, you really do get there. And I know for me, I have many direct experiences, but last year I decided to finish everything I started. I had projects all over the place. I had just all these ideas. I kept all these journals just full of ideas, and something happened, and Julie, you know this, but for everybody, for context, I've been working with Julie for 15 years on the shadow. And so I've done that work and that self-inquiry work, and oh, it's so hard, and really had to face like all of those ugly parts of ourselves. And so something changed for me last year when I decided to finish what I started. And it was much bigger than I realized until really this last month, honestly, when I was reading your book and I realized, wow, like all that work and really the not finishing stuff was part of my shadow. It was like this lazy part of myself that just didn't really want to engage in all of the energy because I didn't want to complete the work inside myself. And so when I forced myself to complete projects that were painful, like business accounting, dealing with family or old stuff, and by doing that, it birthed this channel. I mean, truly, being able to step into Buddhist Biohacker and do this, I don't know that I would have committed to this schedule or the time commitments or any of these things had I not really fully engaged that. And I realized that I wasn't fully engaging with my clients as a spiritual worker too. And I think, I was really holding myself back, and I was really not wanting to engage in that energy. And I made this commitment, like not just that I'm going to finish what I started, but if I make a commitment or I make an appointment, I'm going to stick to it. If I'm going to sign up for something, it's going to happen, and looked at it as a contract. And that's the biggest change for me. So it really can change you. And yeah, I'm doing stuff. I mean, I made a movie. I don't even know how that's possible, and it's like, wow, it's like happened and it's coming out.
Yes. And I do also want to kind of put what you said into context as well. Even though you and I, yes, we've been working together for 15 years or something like that. You weren't consistently working on the shadow for 15 years. I don't want to say that to people because they might be thinking, oh my God, I can't do that for 15 years. It's not that, it doesn't take that long. But what happened in your case, Lisa, and obviously it's different for people, but you worked on it in pockets here and there. Because the other thing is that you were dealing with other aspects and deepening into doing your work, for example, and whatever else was going on in between diving into those different facets through those 15 years. And that was just your way of working, and it worked out beautifully. For me, I just put my hands up and said, I want to go full tilt and full, just like crazy person, full into it. I don't want it to spread out for a long time. So that was why it was really intense for me. And it was dealt with in a fairly relatively short space of time. And I do also want to say as well, I think given that things are changing so dramatically and people are opening up so quickly during this time, that even the shadow work, it feels to me, is being speeded up and intensified and kind of shot through in a much faster pace than it was formerly. And the proof behind those words is that I've been hearing evidence of that from clients and from friends who've been reading the book and are really burning through a lot in a very, very short space of time. And they're having huge epiphanies and huge shifts, and it's changing everything very quickly. So it doesn't have to necessarily be, a long sort of, I don't want to say battle, but a long meeting. Let's put it like that.
Yes, that's a good point. And I think your book, and for everybody who is joining us, that there's a lot of new people coming on here, and we've got lots of comments. Julie has just released her brand new book. and it is called Meeting the Shadow, Finding Yourself. And Julie, I think for everybody listening, that is a expedient way to complete your shadow work. I mean, I think your book is a gift for all of us to move through that very quickly and rapidly during this time of awakening, for sure.
Yes, because the thing is I'm speaking about it from direct experience and from having spent, you know, a great deal of time and energy in doing the spiritual practices, living in an ashram, working with the saints, sages, and siddhas I work with. And because, you know, I wrote the book essentially because they asked me to, and they asked me to do it in a very short space of time. And, you know, at one point it was quite funny because I did say to Nityananda, Bhagavan Nityananda, why does it have to be done so quickly? It was really uncomfortable because I was, you know, I was having to really work night and day over this, you know, a short period of time to get it finished before August 1st. That's what I was told. And what he said is it's beneficial to work in a short space of time. That way the ego doesn't get involved. And I really loved it. And I know that it, you know, every chapter is activated by the siddhas, by the great beings that directed me to write it. And I know that, again, I can stand in the authenticity of these words because that has been evidenced in the emails and the many messages I've been getting from people. Even in the kind of chapter 1, you know, I was receiving emails from people saying, you know, how much had shifted and changed for them. So it's really very powerful. And of course, yeah. And you know what happens is when we start diving into us, because you're diving into ourselves, you're not diving into somebody else's, you know, teachings. As lovely as a teaching might be from a saint or a sage or a siddha, you know, the real power, the real authenticity is when you dive into yourself and you receive the wisdom from your very own self. And when I say self, I mean it with a capital S. And, you know, we're really speaking about the higher self or source or God itself. So when you have that direct communion with your very own self, it changes everything, actually, because it gives you a tremendous trust and tremendous confidence that you can lean into, you can listen, and you can rely and trust what you are hearing inside yourself firsthand. It's not borrowed information. And that does completely change kind of the orientation of your life, because there's a power and an energy in that as well. That power is given, that energy, the energy of source is made available. And that's why you can do what you know, that's why you can create the Buddhist Biohacker. That's why I can, you know, write a book in a relatively short space of time. And, you know, essentially say yes to what we're being asked to do.
Yes, say yes. We have so many questions and comments. I'm going to start sharing some of these. So, let's see. So Rachel says, hi, ladies. She said, Julie, you said it took several years to complete the work. How many hours a day, and did you work on it every day? So you sort of addressed that, but I don't know if there's anything else that you want to say about that.
Yeah, well, the time that I remember the most is when I had that kind of earth-shattering recognition of the shadow when I was at the ashram, because I'd gone there. You know, I can't say I went there with an expectation that I'd have bliss-filled experiences, but that had been my kind of like daily way of living for years and years and years. So I didn't expect it would be any different, really. You know, that's what I thought was going to happen. And instead, literally almost from day one, the shadow appeared, and then it was grueling because, you know, I was in this amazing place. I was off my work schedule. Everybody was like tripping around, like with smiles and saying how wonderful it was. And I was feeling like crap because I was like, you know, anger would come up and frustration would come up and depression would come up. And I'd wake up in the morning just kind of watching to see what was there. And there was no you know, ordinarily when we feel like off or depressed or down or upset or something, there's usually a trigger. We can track it back to something that's showing us why we're feeling upset, for example. You know, you can figure it out and then try and resolve. What I would try and go back and find out what the kind of the trigger was, and I couldn't find anything. I didn't know where it was coming from. I just knew it felt really old and that it was coming up to be released. And all I could do was watch it. And then in some instances, I was told to do self-inquiry around it. And so, you know, I would kind of just listen to what I was told. Sometimes it would just kind of, I'd just watch it and it would just disappear. And then I'd think it had been dealt with, and then it would show up in a different form the next day. And that went on intensely and intently for 18 months. And then while I was in India, and then for around another 6 months when I was in New York at an ashram there. And then that continued off and on when I was working. So, and the thing is you know, what I said was, look, you know, I can be dense sometimes, really, I can be a bit slow. You have to show me. I need to feel it inside my body when it's, you know, it's shadow, because I don't want to, and this is important as well, I didn't want to label everything as the shadow, the shadow, the shadow, and get obsessive about it. You know, it was important to have it be organic and natural, but I just really, really wanted to be able to see. And I just said, listen, bring it on. Let me see the shadow in dreams. Let me see it in my life, even if it's really uncomfortable and it really is painful to see. I need to own it and bring everything back that I projected out or blamed onto other people. And so because of that intention, you know, it was pretty intense at times. But then, you know, what happened is, and I think it's true with everybody actually, once you actually say yes and start engaging with it, the first few kind of experiences can be very painful and very dramatic and just like, ugh, I don't want to even look at that. You know? But then you kind of get into it. I guess it's a bit like, you know, you work out and you're lifting weights and it just burns so much.
Yes.
And then as you build muscle, you can do it and it doesn't hurt so bad, you know, and then you kind of look forward to it. So that's really what started to happen. And it just became a lot less painful. And also, I think the thing is I became clear about what it was, because in the beginning I really didn't really understand it. I'd never studied it. I had never done psychotherapy or counseling or anything. And what really helped me was finding a book that was written, I think I spoke about this before, by Llewellyn Vaughan Lee, on the shadow. I think the book was called The Call and the Echo, and he speaks about dream work and analysis and looking at the shadow and stuff like that. So being able to kind of at least label it somehow without having a too heavy a label on it made it much more kind of easy and accessible. And then I just realized this is necessary. It has to be done. And I just don't want to avoid it anymore. I don't want to live in a way that is in avoidance, because I also understood that those periods when I was feeling down and depressed and irritated or whatever, fed up, frustrated, whatever, that linked to the shadow. I just knew it did. So, you know, and let me also say, it's not that after you've done the shadow work, irritation, frustration doesn't come up anymore. It does. The human emotions do continue to come up, but you don't get pulled down by them. You don't label yourself as being that. There's a stepping back. There's more of an orientation to live in the self, in the state of absolute awareness itself, and to witness that, and to also welcome it. It's okay if irritation comes up, or depression, or despair, whatever. It's okay, because that isn't who I am. I am that which is prior to the movement of these emotions and these patterns and these old states of being.
So good. I just bought The Call and the Echo, so I'm really anxious to dig into it. I've got some much needed time off where I'm going to read it coming up. And I loved what you said about comparing it to exercising, because that is kind of how it is. It's kind of like eventually you get stronger and stronger, and then you look at it more from a curiosity, of, well, I wonder what happens if I actually address this thing that's upsetting me. and then you do it and you realize it's actually okay.
Yeah. It's, and again, this is so important, because on so many paths, and I know this as well because of counseling a lot of people over the last, I don't know how many years, there's this idea when we start out that we've got to become this kind of spiritual superman or superwoman and not get upset, and only think the highest thoughts, and be kind and loving to everyone and everything, and to be like almost like our idea of a saint or a spiritual person in a long white robe. And we discount our humanity. And if you discount your humanity, I can guarantee you will be a miserable spiritual seeker, and you'll get on everybody's nerves. You'll be a pain in the butt. Because there's no compassion. When you include your humanity, when you include and invite the darkness in, whatever that looks like on any given day, then there's great compassion, there's great love, there's a great capacity to be able to meet anyone wherever they are and welcome them. Whether they're a spiritual seeker or they're somebody who's an atheist or whatever, whatever the story is, it doesn't matter. There's space for everyone. There's space for every kind of expression, because this is God's play. This is consciousness. God is everything. And this is why shadow work is so important, because it does make us, it makes us very humble without even trying to be humble. You become the epitome of humility, because you faced your own shadow, you faced your own darkness, and that, if that is in you, and it is in everybody else, then there's a shared humanity, there's a shared recognition, there's a shared condition. And until you have the courage to look at your own darkness, there's always a part of you that wants to pull away. And that's why you can't bear to be with certain people, because certain people will trigger in you what you don't want to see.
Yeah, that's true.
And everybody knows about that, right?
Yes. Oh my gosh. More than we care right now. I actually have some things about that when we talk about your family dynamic chapter. We have, let's see. So Raquel says, I decided to engage in the shadow just this past April. It has been mind blowing what has come up and what I have been able to move through in 4 months. Rachel says, here's one of my favorite quotes. Even if the behaviors of a loved one or a boss are still in place, there will be either no or very little activation in you. There is hope. And we also have a question. What do you mean by when the ego is spiritualized?
Oh, that's a good one.
Really good one.
I love this one. All right. So, I speak about, I think there's a chapter in the book where I speak about a friend who I used to belong to, a yoga group with for several years. And she presents very well. She says the right things. She can quote, quotes from enlightened beings and so on and so forth. Yet, the community has been very compassionate and very kind with respect to allowing her to, be angry, be manipulative, exhibit behaviors that really, really run counter to being in truth. Mm. And I know we can all probably, everybody who's listening in today or who watches later on can think of at least one person in a spiritual group that looks and sounds the part, but you see there's a dark side that isn't acknowledged. And the reason that that's in place is that what happens is the ego can become very strong with respect to identifying with being a spiritual person. So, I get up at 4 a.m. and I do my meditation and I do my hatha yoga for an hour and a half every day, and I chant and I read holy books and I don't watch the television and I'm not reading the newspaper. And there's often a great long list of these kind of positives that a spiritual person will do. But often what he or she will not do is own and take full ownership of his or her anger or behaviors that are less than, let's say, stellar. So they'll separate away from them. And what happens is the identification with being a spiritual person, which is kind of like, the idea is, I'm more elevated than the regular Joe because he doesn't meditate or he doesn't channel or he doesn't, you know what I mean? So it's like that. So it's an us and them separation. And because it doesn't include the humanity of the person, the spiritual person, the shadow hasn't been owned, then it's really not much better than somebody who sits in front of a television and drinks beer and just watches shows all day. Because and in many ways a spiritualized ego can be much stronger than someone who doesn't have any spiritual path at all, because there can be a stronger attitude of denial about the anger within. So there's often a tendency to separate away and think, the masses or the sheep. I've heard that a few times as well. All those sheep don't know anything because they don't meditate, they haven't had an awakening. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but that's really what the essence of a spiritualized ego is all about. It's about really kind of trying to build up the light and not take ownership of the darkness.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you're talking about it, and I'm glad you addressed it in the book, because I think it's definitely in the air, I think, right now, in all the spiritual communities, and all of us are wondering who to trust and wondering, what we feel, and seeing, that dysfunction in different spiritual groups. And a lot of us I have a spiritual community, right? We have Buddhist Biohackers, our community. And so there's also this desire to do the right thing and to support everyone through the journey without creating those same issues. And so it's really important to talk about and important to look at. And I'm deep into those last few chapters of your book. There's the chapter that talks about us versus them. I'm pulling up your chapters because I want to get the exact words. So the darkness and spiritual communities is one of them. And then the collective shadow is another one of the chapters that I think is really important chapters, and ones I'm really working through right now, because I think all of us finding our voice is so important, and then understanding how to use that voice in a way that creates balance instead of portraying, it's like I've been that person who's been to those spiritual experiences, and to somebody that I idealized, or that was, a famous author or whatever, and you go and you meet them, and there's this like portrayal of they're all in white, and they have these conversations, and then you see and hear things that are disjointed later, and it dissolves that vision that you had, that illusion. And I think that illusion of non-humanness is the biggest thing. And I've experienced it myself over the years, where it's like, oh, wait, you have a marriage, or, you actually went to a bar or whatever. And this cracking of like, whatever, thinking that we're in a cave, like meditating and connecting with spirit. I think the dissolving of that. And I'm having this insight right now. Your energy, Julie, today is so profound. I can almost not be grounded. I mean, I know it's 8/8, and I know the energy of the siddhas and the saints that you work with, but like, I feel like I'm swimming in an ocean. I almost can't talk. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah,
Amazing.
let me speak to that, because that's also
Yes.
important. Ahead of the call, twice this morning, actually, I went to my altar space and did the invocation and the activation with the saints, sages, and siddhas. And I asked that, every single word that is spoken, every anecdote that's shared, absolutely everything that is discussed during this time is fully activated with the awakening power of the saints, sages, and siddhas, going back to beginningless time. And for every single person to actually really feel that deep in every single cell of their being, through, every state, in the mental body, the physical body, the emotional body, the subtle body, in the dream state, in the waking state, through all the relationships, through, I covered everything. I stated and I clearly articulated that. So that is what is being felt very, very powerfully right now. So I'm glad you spoke to that, because
it's beautiful, but I'm like, I have no idea where I am, because I'm like swimming in this ocean of I don't know what, trying to talk.
Well, that's okay. Look, I can pick up on, or you can just pull some more questions, or I could look at some of the questions I have here.
Yeah, we've got some great shares, but yeah, I think you pull up some of the questions you have. We have some great shares, so keep your questions and shares coming. Everybody is just so great. They're like, we're all here. Somebody said, we all are here, baby. And somebody said, I will definitely speak to that. And lots of stars and hearts and prayers. And so you guys are just awesome. So, and there's many of you joining in even now. So just welcome. And, but yeah, I think, why don't you pull up some of your questions and we'll go with that. And I'm going to just grab myself.
Yeah, sure. And actually, while we're on this subject of this profundity and the availability of this awakening power, let me also stand behind my words and say, this isn't just about the direct experience and the sharing through this form. It's available for every single person who's listening in today. It's always available. The light of the self, the activation, the grace of the great beings is available to everyone. It might be that your connection, if you like, your resonance is with Lord Jesus or with Mother Mary or Lord Buddha. The form isn't so important. The recognition of your resonance with the form, obviously, is important. But kind of the outer form isn't so important, because it's one energy, it's one force, if you like, it's one power, it's one flow of grace that's coming through, and it's available to you whenever you want it to be. Essentially, it's not like you have to sit in lotus posture for 2 hours or 3 hours to get it. It's always like, let me get some of that. I want some of that. It's just being with yourself in the fullest way possible, including your humanity, loving the mistakes you've made. Really, there are no mistakes, but, placing value on what you've learned, and being with all of it and being in joy, even if it's painful, to look at the shadow, for example. So, all right. So I thought I'd throw that in because that is very important. All right. So here is a question. This was again from Raquel, but I think, I don't mind. I don't think she minds me sharing. And it was with respect to the chapter on the magic pill. And for anybody that hasn't read the book or hasn't got to that, the magic pill was really relating to those spiritual seekers and truth seekers and people that, maybe read about something, or they hear about enlightenment or realization, or aspects of the, within the process of that, and they want a teacher or a guru or an enlightened master to give them kind of the answer in a sort of bullet point. And I know that you've had experience of that, Lisa, with respect to clients you've worked with, you know, and the tendency, it's because essentially as human beings, as the true nature expressing through the human form, let's put it like that, because that's the truth of it, you know, because of the humanness, we want things pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that actually has speeded up even more over the last few years, because there is so much available online for free.
Yeah.
We can be in the presence of a saint or a sage or a siddha. We can see images of, you know, His Holiness or Neem Karoli Baba, or, you know, whoever the great being is. And we can get teachings really quickly, and, you know, we can listen to talks and podcasts and so on for free and all of those things. So what happens is there's a tendency to want to kind of contract everything down into a sort of a paragraph or a sentence, or take it like a magic pill, swallow it, you know, and then you get it.
Yeah.
You know, wouldn't that be wonderful? You know, and honestly, sometimes that does happen. You can have this huge like initiation or download, or again, as you know, Lisa, you can just be blitzed. Yes. And there's a huge shift, and you just suddenly see your whole life completely differently. It's like night and day. It's like being reborn. You know, all of those things can happen. You know, for the most part, though, it's more of a process. You know, and in a way, you have to go through the process, because there has to be some sort of integration, so that you don't kind of like, you know, leave your body, or, you know, do something crazy, you know, and those things have happened. And we've heard, you know, we've all heard cases of, you know, maybe someone has taken LSD or taken a drug or something, and it's just created this huge like awakening, and then they thought they could fly, and they've done crazy things and ended up killing themselves. So yeah. But, you know, the key is really in the process and in the integration of the teaching of the lesson. So anyway, I'm kind of giving that context, but.
Well, no, I love it. And if you don't mind, I just want to say about that is, I think it seems like being in the process leads to that big awakening. Yes. Or if you have it's like, if I have a major download, it's either because I just did work that allowed me to see things in a different way, or I'm about ready to do some big work and I needed that download. It seems like, but you do have to have that integration that you're speaking to. That's like the most important part, I think.
Yes, because then you're grounded, you know, and it doesn't kind of come and go. It's not elusive, kind of, it's grounded. And then also you even though you might not necessarily be speaking about the shadow, for example, you could be speaking to somebody at the food store about the cost of the apples. You know, we're oftentimes in the Bahamas, we stand around talking about the cost of everything because it's so darn expensive. Or we'll be going, oh my gosh. But the thing is that because the work has been done within your being, every single word that you speak carries the Shakti, carries the energy of awakening. It carries the depth and the power of having done the shadow work. So you might be speaking to someone completely off topic, but they're something in them is moved and changed and activated because you've done the work. You know, and it's what I've said many times, is your state does the work, actually, is what happens. So it's really incredible, you know, and we have heard evidence and seen and read evidence of this in the lives of great beings, and some of the stories you hear about, you know, what they've said or done. And it isn't necessarily that they are speaking about awakening or those things. So it's just, and this is really how you uplift and awaken humanity. When you work on yourself, everything changes, and the energy of who you are helps to awaken other people. And it's a good job the ego doesn't get involved with all of that. Otherwise it would hijack it. Because the thing is, most of the time you don't even know. I mean, I can guarantee every single person that's listening today has said something to someone that might not even be conscious about having said it, right? But something has been said that has triggered that person into seeing their lives in a different way, or receiving an insight or a teaching or something, because it came from source and it was given freely, and it conveys the energy of that. You know, so all of this is really so profound, especially when you've done the work on the shadow, because then there's nothing that kind of blocks you or kind of pulls you away from standing in the truth of who you are, which includes, you know, all of your yummy humanity. You know, even if you might be a bit weird or a bit playful, or, you know, whatever the story is that you might have about yourself, it doesn't matter. Because it's all authentic. All right, so let me come back to Raquel's question, because this is a good one as well. So Raquel's asking about the magic pill, which, you know, I was saying is, you know, trying to get truth in a sort of bullet form or whatever. So Raquel is asking, is this where poverty consciousness comes from? If we don't place value on where our gifts come from, how can we expect to embrace and share our gifts? Is this correct? And the answer is yes, it is correct. Because, you know, what happens is we inherit through our family, through our upbringing, you know, these ideas we have about not being good enough, or parts of ourselves are not acceptable or not palatable, and we try and hide them away, and then we diminish who we are, and then we kind of tiptoeing through life because we're worried, you know, somebody might trigger something, or somebody might find out, you know, if they really know who I was, and, you know, it's all of that, you know, like crazy stuff that goes on, you know, and in that mix are our gifts. We can't stand behind and own our gifts if we're not standing behind and owning the fullness of who we are. And that was clearly made very evident, you know, and again, I'd share this in the book about how my own kind of gifts just kind of exploded. And I began working with them and then seeing and owning and looking at the value of not only what they were teaching me and what the shadow was teaching me, but the value they had with respect to sharing them and utilizing those as a touchstone for people to be able to access their own gifts and recognize their own shadow elements, and to be able to stand in both the light and the darkness, and to embrace both, rather than being in this just half embrace, just wanting the light but not wanting to look at the darkness. So that's the truth. And then as part of that, Raquel is also asking, you know, how do you place value on the self? Which is a great question.
Yeah.
What are the practical pointers to that? Yeah. You know, and it'd be great to actually include some of the viewers and ask their opinions. How do they place value on the self? You know, and I can speak to that in terms of my own kind of process. And it really was very simple. It was really about, from the very beginning, when I get a hit to do something, even if it's way outside my comfort zone, I just say yes. And that's how I place the highest value on the self. Because, and here's the reason for me. The reason is that oftentimes I really do not know how I'm going to do what I've been asked to do. But I say yes, and then I absolutely trust that I'll be given the help, or someone will show up to give me a hand, or, you know, whatever it is that I need help with, someone will show up and will be there. And, you know, and I can point to this really very recently, actually, because when I was writing, you know, I was trying to write the book Meeting the Shadow and get that all finished and everything else. And I think I talked about this with you, Lisa, but you know, I asked my husband Tony to help me because he's an English teacher and all those things. And he's a darling and I love him. And he works painfully slowly because he's very particular. And I was on a timeline. So I said, honey, I love you and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. But I need to get this book finished. I need to get the book, you know, even if there's a few little errors or commas missing here and there or whatever, I do what I'm told. And I was told to publish it before August 1st, which I did. Now, I had not said anything to anybody other than you when we'd had the conversation, but I just thought, you know, I've been a one-woman show for all these years. It was really great to have some help. And then my dear friend, Rachel Abel, sent me a message last week saying that she bought the book and she loved it. And, you know, she could help me with a few, like, just tightening up a few things, you know what I mean? So it's like, yes, thank you, Rachel. So she worked on it, you know, the last 3 or 4 days and, you know, tightened things up a little bit and did a great job. And I love her and she's timely. And then I you know, I just republished it again today with a few, you know, with the edits finished and all of that. So, you know, and the reason I'm telling this story, actually 2 things. One is if anybody who's listening needs any help with any editorial help, I can really guarantee that Rachel will be able to help you in a great way. She's very fast and she's very affordable. Just saying, if you need anybody. But you know, I'm sharing this story because this is proof, not that I need proof, but when I'm asked to do something, I say yes. And I absolutely know before I even say yes, that I'll get all the help I need and someone will show up to help me. Because you know what it's like, Lisa, oftentimes you say, yes, you'll do something. And then you go, whoa, wait, I don't know anything about how to do this.
Yes.
Whoops. Why did I say yes? What was I thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, that was one of the very first things that happened to me after I got Shaktipat in the dream with Bhagavan Nityananda in 1989. I think I may have shared this before, but it's worth retelling. So, you know, even though by profession, I've always been a teacher, you know, and I'm very comfortable standing up in front of students talking about, you know, art and like different techniques and blah, 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 blah. I absolutely dreaded the thought of public speaking. I was always, you know, very shy, especially with adults in, you know, like formal settings. So after Shaktipat, I shared my experience, my lucid dream experience, with the host of the meditation group that I was going to at the time. And there weren't that many people. There was maybe about 10 or 12 people. So he called me up and he said, hey, I heard about your experience. Would you give an experience share next week? So I just said, yes, sure. And then I put the phone down and I'm thinking, what are you thinking? You know you don't like to do public speaking. You're going to bet your stomach will churn. You'll have an upset stomach for days before. Your head will spin. You won't be able to speak. Your mouth will go dry. You know, it was all of those things. But I could not help myself. Yes came out before I could kind of like modify it or reel it back. And that has been consistent since the day I got Shaktipat right up to now. What happens is yes rises up and, you know, I just have to do what I'm asked to do. And I know that somehow I'll be given all the help I need. And I know you know this because this is how you live your life as well, Lisa.
Yes, it is. I've said yes to some wild things. And I think right now what's up for me is the documentary, because we're going to release it at the end of this month. So if you guys have not seen the trailer for Awakened Grace, it's here on YouTube. Julie is in it, sharing her full story so you can hear her entire story of awakening. And, you know, I just was told to make a documentary about awakenings. And I was like, well, can I do that? And I thought, well, okay, and just like you said, I was like, okay. And I just started doing it. And, I wasn't sure how to make a movie and I wasn't sure how to get all of it together, but it all just worked out in this perfect way. And through that experience, and I think this is something that happens too, is when you say yes and you start to do the work, not only do you get the support, but you come through it in a completely different way. It's like a whole other set of inner work. Like coming through this, I've learned that I actually really, really love film production. I love it. I love being creative with it. And I've gotten better at it. And I have a feeling I'm going to get better and better and better at it. And I have a lot of ideas about what I want to do. And so, through this process, and this is something that came up when I worked on your book, and I'm going to try to say it as concisely as possible. I had these gifts to connect with the unseen, and I thought, I'm going to go heal people with these gifts. I'm going to go use these gifts. I'm supposed to be a psychic medium.
Mm-hmm.
And what I learned through, this 15-year long journey of healing people was I was actually healing myself. And when you do the shadow work and you heal yourself, I identify now as this creative person who loves film production. I love creating the show. I'm really good and organized. I love doing the summits, to help the planet. So it's like I'm still helping to heal people. Yes. But I'm doing it through gifts that actually don't drain me. And don't get me wrong, I love working with individuals too, but there's a different, I feel revitalized when I'm working on film or creating a production or talking to you here on Buddhist Biohacker. And that is the profound journey of shadow work, is coming to a place where you don't have to identify with something that was actually possibly draining you and exhausting you because it was really not the innate gift that you have.
Yes. And the thing is when you've worked on, or when you're working on the shadow, you'll be amazed at the directions you kind of not pushed into. I mean, sometimes we are pushed, but we feel drawn to go in new directions because of the work on the shadow that we would maybe formerly have like pushed away or been too scared to go into. And that has happened consistently, in my own life and also in the lives of the people that I've worked with. And it's absolutely incredible. Some of the things that people are doing now that I've worked with that, even a few years ago, they would never have dreamed of doing. And it's just incredible because, what happens is we say yes to owning our gifts, skills and talents and sharing them with the world. And really that is all about placing the highest value on who we are and what we have to give. And we are not, as, in the words of Miles Monroe that I quote in the book, he always says, don't, he used to say, he's passed away now, but, don't go to your grave with your gifts still in you. And unfortunately, that's what happens with a lot of people because they haven't addressed the shadow. They haven't made friends with their own darkness. And what a gift when you do. I mean, it just changes everything.
It does. And I'm just joyful.
Yes.
And like you said, there are definitely things that come up in your journey where you're like, oh my gosh, here's this thing I have to deal with. And I've had some things recently where I've been uncomfortable, there's conflict and you have to speak up and have boundaries. And it's like, oh, it's like stressful, but you just do it. And you have to do it with this big smile because you know that you're doing something that you love and that you're doing that even when you create a boundary, you're creating it from love. It's not coming from that shadow place. It's coming from a place of real love and joy. And oh my gosh, you guys have so many comments, Julie. We have so many. I'm going to read through some of these. So we have, It is so hard to have a conversation with someone when they have triggered me and when I know they won't accept what I say. Is it better to let it go and not discuss it at all? So that's one question. Then someone said, quit apologizing for being yourself. I had asked in the group, how do you place value on yourself? So this is some of the responses to that. Quit apologizing for being yourself. Realize you're not responsible for others' perceptions of you. Try to stay in the flow and in the zone. Worthiness of self has become very much in my awareness lately, but especially today, this is even more confirmation of that, and heart. We have, oh my gosh, I love Julie. We have, in doing shadow work, I realize when I do not listen to self, I am not honoring and valuing myself. Like Julie said, when you listen to self and follow through, it is honoring self. We have a big yes with exclamation point. And then we have, thank you for writing this book for me, XOXO. So you guys, those are awesome. Just keep those coming. But that's all the comments and the questions that are in there right now.
Yeah, you know, and they're all really beautiful because they all, again, validate what we've been speaking about and what I spoke about in the book. And also, you know, what the sitters were asking me to speak to and share from. You know, because what's happening is when we do begin to wake up to the importance of doing the shadow work, we realize that we've been rejecting ourselves, right? And it's terrible. It's horrible to go through life where you've contracted all the time. You're trying to put on this like fake persona or, you know, appear to be nice all the time. And it's exhausting. You know, it's really exhausting. And obviously it doesn't mean that you go around insulting everybody, you know, speaking your truth no matter what. And the point that somebody just made about not being able to speak to somebody who triggers her or him, that's important as well, because the thing that we have to be conscious of is being conscious about the right time. So if somebody is in complete denial, and I can think of several of my family members who just, you know, haven't even set foot, you know, into doing any of that work. They haven't got a clue. It's all about the other, you know, blaming them, blaming this one, blaming that one, and so on and so forth. So it would be really redundant for me to try and have a conversation to shine light, because I know it wouldn't be heard. So it's really about being conscious and understanding. It's really about honoring where someone is at. You know, if it's the right time, we know, and we can speak. And if it isn't, then you just have to let it be. You have to let it go, even if it kind of makes you look like you're at fault and you've said something or done something, or, you know what I mean? We have to be big enough to be able to accept that and take that on and be okay with it, and not be trying to, you know, I need to put this right, I need to tell him or her, you know. They don't get it and they don't understand.
Absolutely. We had an interesting question that was emailed to us that I wanted to share. It's kind of peculiar because it's a little bit different of a topic, but I actually think it's a really good question. So Cynthia wrote in and she said that she would like to be done after this life, that she does not want to come back. And she had a question for you about that. She wanted to know what your thoughts were and what your teachings were around what to do to complete this cycle so that she can be done. And I thought it spoke to so many different things. So I did want to ask you that and see what your thoughts were about her question.
Well, you know, that question often does come up, and I can't speak to, you know, where Cynthia's at with respect to her state of being or anything. But oftentimes that comes up when there's a lot of pain, unresolved pain in people that they don't necessarily want to work with, or they're dealing with painful situations in a family or in their home life or so on. So, you know, there's this kind of drive. yeah, or the other time I've seen it is when a spiritual seeker loves the high states, love the expansive, joy-filled states of being and the wonderful, lucid dreams or meditation experiences, but does not want to deal with, real life or the waking state or whatever. So there's a tendency to want to leave and not come back, because the idea is that wherever this state is beyond this realm of existence, you won't have to deal with all the BS or all the, people who are being annoying or whatever the story is. So, it would be helpful to kind of know where she's at. But, what I can say is that with all the saints and the sages and the siddhas that I have met and I know, they agree to come back because they are committed to uplifting every single person in humanity and awakening humanity. As difficult as a rebirth might be, that is their drive, that is their goal. And speaking from where I'm at today, right now, that is my intention as well. Because I cannot bear to think of anyone, and this brings tears to my eyes. I cannot bear to think of anyone that does not recognize the self, does not know the self, and is having to go through life in a very contracted state of what the yogis call ignorance, a state of ignorance when you don't know the self, and to deal with everything, especially nowadays and what's happening in the world today, from this very painful place. Because the thing is, as the Buddha says, when you do not know who you are, when you do not know the self, you suffer. You really suffer, and we know what suffering is. We know what that feels like. So, I've often had this conversation with Tony, actually, about with respect to work. And that is, I'm going to keep working until the day I leave this body. That's my goal. And there's nothing else I want to do. There's nothing, what else is there? So, to be a part of the awakening of the whole of humanity is the greatest gift. And, I know these great beings take birth again and again to help facilitate and expedite and accelerate this awakening. So I would just say, look at where that desire not to come back comes from.
I appreciate so much what you're saying, because I've actually heard it a lot. I've heard that discussion a lot about not wanting to come back, and I share the same sentiment as you in that I don't have a single question about coming back. Like, I think, and it's a really beautiful thing, because His Holiness speaks of that when he speaks of taking the vow of the Bodhisattva, is you come back, I think it's for like 3 eons or some crazy amount of time till everyone's awakened. But regardless of what that timing looks like, I mean, I think, wanting to, do that work. I have a joke with my husband that when I'm 95, I'm still going to be shuffling my cards and like looking at stuff for people. And it's a joke, but it's not really, because that's how I feel too. It's like, what else would we be doing here?
Yes, I agree. When I'm like, I don't know how old I'll be, 90s or 100, whatever, I still be zipping around at night in the lucid dream state, visiting people, working with people, and so on and so forth, and doing all of that, and then doing as much. Because the thing is, you don't need to be like amazingly fit, and you could be quite frail in your physical form and still doing the work. And the thing, I have this memory of going on to YouTube and seeing video footage of the mother. And just to provide context, I'd never read or heard about this great being called the mother until I had a lucid dream of her when I was living on Grand Bahama Island. It was around 2004, 2005. And I was, I was very unhappy in my job because I was, still doing the work on the shadow, and I got no boundaries, and I had this ridiculous schedule, and I was just working. It was ridiculous. Anyway, so I had this lucid dream where she appeared, and I recognized her immediately, and she pulled me towards her, and I was just sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. And she referenced my work, and she said, they've made it so that you can stay if you want to, or you can leave. It's up to you in terms of finding new work, someplace else. So anyway, and the short version of that is I ended up resolving the shadow issues, and then I was absolutely fine in that position, and I stayed there for 14 years or something. Anyway, so what happened was I came out of that lucid dream, and she told me her name was the mother. So I went online, typed in the mother, and this image came up of this woman, and it was this exact same person that I'd seen in this lucid dream. And it turned out she was originally a French woman, and she'd gone to India, and she met Sri Aurobindo. And she eventually, I forget the finer details of the story, but anyway, so she went, and she was kind of like his partner. She lived at the ashram with him. I don't know whether it was like partner, but she was with him at the ashram. She attained enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it. And she was in her 90s, and every day she would go up onto the balcony of the place she was living, and she would give darshan. And darshan is to have the company of the truth. So what she was doing was she would be standing on the balcony, just looking out at every single person that was in the ashram compound. And she was directing the light of her awakened state into every single person that was there. And she would stand there for she had difficulty standing up, you could see, but she would stand there and smile and nod and look at every single person that had turned up that day. And sometimes she'd do it twice a day. And I think the footage is still available. If you put the mother into YouTube, you can see it. But she's quite frail, and she's up there in her 90s giving darshan every single day. And I looked at that and I thought, yes.
I don't know how frail I could really see you getting, Julie. You're pretty strong, I think, but.
Well, I'm trying. I'm doing not aerobics. I'm doing Pilates twice a day. And, talk about burning muscles in the beginning. It's like, oh my gosh. And my friend Julie has this fast, like Latino music going on, and we're on the tennis court, and it's hot, even at like 7 a.m. It's very humid, hot and humid. It's just like we're both groaning. Oh! I must say, I do feel a lot better.
Oh gosh, I need some of that mojo. I was really like just rocking my yoga practice until about 5 weeks ago. And then I've been sitting and not even going outside. So I need that vibe, because it feels so good when you start to get that strength and you feel that energy. But I've seen timelines extended. Totally random off topic, but I do think that there's a lot to come for us really soon with epigenetics and healing and energy and things, where we're going to be able to live well a lot longer. So that makes me joyful. And you guys are just full of questions. I love this, Julie. There's so many questions and comments. You guys are doing great. And we have a few questions. I think what I'll do is throw a couple of these, and then Julie, you can decide what you want to do first. But Raquel says, I have a question from chapter 13, the final nail in the coffin. You describe personhood taking a back seat and the self coming to the forefront. Can you describe the experiences you had in relation to this? For example, some spiritual teachers have said in this happening, they are at one with everyone and everything. What is your experience of feeling at one? That's a really good question. And then another one from Riley is, how do we balance honoring ourselves and honoring or allowing others to be where they're at, when in family dynamics where it appears frequency levels are reaching extreme, and some goals are to balance out that family or group frequency? So those are the
Yeah.
two kind of separate things, but wherever you want to go with those.
Yeah, those are both really good questions. So let me speak to the second question first with respect to family dynamics. You know, sometimes it can feel like you're on a bit of a tightrope. And sometimes you really just have to just keep, you know, not say anything. And as I said earlier, to just be big enough and expansive enough to let whatever is playing out play out, and be okay with it. You know, not feel like you've got to try and raise the vibration of your husband or your mother-in-law or whoever is in your field, because you know, the minute you start to do that, it starts to get a bit kind of icky, because you're in that place of sort of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
And the most loving, the most kind, the most generous thing that you could possibly do, and actually the best way to activate and help raise energy, is to create space and to meet whatever's coming up with the kindest, most compassionate kind of energy that you possibly can. You know, and the thing is you'll know when it's time for you to speak your truth, and when it's appropriate, and when it will be heard, and when it won't be. And again, I can speak from a direct experience. You know, many times, especially when I lived in Nassau between 1980 and 2000, and I was working in a government school, and you know, it was a bit tricky at times, but you know, I really learned that if I got a really big impulse to speak to truth, I would know it. And if I didn't speak in that moment to truth, I'd feel a bit depressed afterwards, because I knew I'd missed a moment. And I'm sure you've had that happen to you as well, Lisa, when you just realized in his or her own way, this person was really, you know, asking for some light to be shown on this situation, or to have some help or insight with something. And out of fear, sometimes we cannot want to say anything, or we try and minimize it, you know.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, Julie? I just had an experience where I had to have a difficult conversation and I didn't want to have it. And so I didn't want to have it and I didn't want to have it. And then it got expanded until I had to have it. And so I had the difficult conversation and I had it with this love. I was like, okay, I'm going to be in love and, you know, just really share what I'm feeling in a really honest way. Not, I think when you haven't, like, part of doing the work on the shadow is being able to be honest and truthful and not try to
Yeah.
manipulate or be passive aggressive or anything. So I just was really honest, like, this is just absolutely how I'm feeling. And the most incredible thing happened. Not only did that relationship ultimately become stronger and more loving, but that person went through an awakening afterwards. And I realized how greedy it was for me to have not dealt with the conflict.
Yes.
So they are missed opportunities, because if you don't have those discussions, you might actually be holding them back from their own growth into a whole new phase of their journey, no matter how hard it feels to have those conversations.
Yes, exactly. And you know, the Bible famously deals with that kind of question about, you know, the quote about throwing pearls before swine. You know, in other words, what it's saying or speaking to is that you might have the highest wisdom, but if you speak or share that and somebody's either not ready, they're not listening, they don't want to hear it, or whatever, you're really wasting the energy inherent as well in the gift. So you're really kind of throwing away your own energy, and that is really one way of not honoring the self. So you really have to listen and pay attention to, and you can feel it. There's a resonance somehow when the time is right to share. It becomes so obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when you pay attention, and that's when these beautiful conversations happen, and you know, there's an opening and there's just this beautiful flow.
Yeah.
And amazing things happen and come out of that.
Yeah.
So just remind me, what was Raquel's question again?
Okay, her question. Oh, and you guys have more. Oh my gosh. Okay, Raquel's question was, so from chapter 13, the final nail in the coffin, you describe personhood taking a back seat and the self coming to the forefront.
Yes.
Can you describe the experiences you've had in relationship to this? She says, for example, some spiritual teachers have said in this happening, they're at one with everyone and everything. What is your experience at feeling one with everything?
Okay, so the thing with an experience is it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. So by its very nature, it comes and it goes. What I'm speaking to here is something that is irrevocable. It doesn't move, it doesn't change, it is constant. And that came into play, if you like, that took a front and center seating, if I can put it like that. When I described this in the book, when I was listening to Mooji, and let me say here, for those that haven't read the book, I'm not a Mooji follower. It just happened to be that, that day I had this call to go online. Mooji was doing this presentation. And through what he said, through his state, through what I saw in his state, through what I heard him saying and what I was feeling inside myself and recognizing inside myself, I knew that it was only the self, or I saw it was only the self that can recognize the self, or source recognizes source. Absolute awareness itself recognizes absolute awareness itself. So in the moments of that seeing and all of that coming forward, if you like, is the only way I can put it, that then became primary. And from that point on, it hasn't gone into the background, if that makes sense. Because what happens, and I can speak from direct experience, what happens is, I think on the spiritual search, we have an awakening. We have, we may have like beautiful meditation experiences, or, we have these visions or whatever, and then we go back to being a person. And then we have to meditate, we want more visions, and then we go back to being the person. So there's this kind of movement. Would you say that was accurate, Lisa, in terms of?
Yeah,
so there's this move. Yeah, and what happens is, when we're in those expanded states, we're in bliss. It's wonderful. We're in the flow, and it just feels marvelous. When you're in personhood, it's okay if you're in a good mood, that's fine. But oftentimes you're dealing with like anxiety or depression or whatever, all the human stuff comes up, and then we want to be back over there. Right? And this is often why people who flip-flop between the two say they want to be done and they don't want to come back. Right? So there's this, and so that was my case, back and forth, and then over time, eventually you're able to stay longer in the self and less time in the person. So that went on for some time, and then during the process of watching Mooji, and that was actually the end of a process that had started to happen, where I was deepening into silence, actually, is what happened. And that was why I call that chapter the final nail in the coffin, because there was source saw itself as being my primary truth, my true nature. And the personal self kind of took a back seat. And that didn't change. So when I saw that, when I saw that in this kind of in Mooji's presentation, the next morning when I woke up and opened my eyes, I was looking, and it was like, it's still here. It hasn't gone. It hasn't shifted. It hasn't changed. Whereas, when you're seeking and you're trying to do the practices, there's always this flip-flop between the two states of awareness. So I don't know whether that answers the question.
I hope so. It did for me.
Yeah, and you see, okay, so the other side of this as well, what's really good about this as well is that what happens is, for example, when I come onto Buddhist Biohacker and I'm speaking to you, Lisa, I'm speaking to my very own self. Okay, it's a different physical form. We have our personal, our characters and so on, and personal likes, dislikes, whatever, different story, but it's the same self. Everyone I speak to when I'm counseling and working, it's the same self. And the reason I can speak to, obstacles that are in that person's field or shadow elements that they still need to work on, or lack of boundaries or whatever, is because I'm speaking in the self, as the self, to the self, the one self. So, there's no separation. And, I know it kind of boggles people's minds because and I spoke about this in the book, because they're like, how is it possible? You must have Googled me. How is it you don't know me like that? How can you know these things? And I say, because there's only one self. There's only one self, one consciousness, one awareness appearing as all of this, appearing as these separate forms. And again, that's why, and again, I'll reference this in the book, when Muammar Gaddafi was, killed the way he was killed, like a rat in a sewer, I just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried, because it was a form of my very own self. And it was so painful, because it was like, oh my gosh, it just hurts so much that this being who had all this potential and who could have done amazing things in the world created, so many kind of negative events and situations, and then ended his life the way he did. So, and essentially, whether I'm speaking to an adult or a child, and I'm doing like art classes with students, I'll be pointing to the self and speaking from the self to the self, so that there's this recognition in them, and there's a seeing in them that will, start to awaken and grow, even though we're not speaking about spiritual, things. There's the energy of that is being conveyed, that is part of this global awakening to self, realization of self, that, cannot, it can't be stopped now, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so beautifully put. It just really is. And yeah, it's a freight train now.
It certainly is, it's like, oh my word. It's a huge force. And, and this is why, what's coming up for me to speak to now is, there's a lot of, and you and I have spoken about this, but there's a lot online right now kind of pointing to a lot of the darkness, a lot of the dark stories that are surfacing that we're all familiar with, right?
Yeah.
But it's really important to obviously be aware of that, but to still stay in the light of the self and shine light and promote light, rather than getting obsessive about, going into the dark stories. And with respect to this, I'm not speaking about the shadow, your own personal shadow. I'm speaking to, a much kind of bigger drive that seems to be coming up in people who haven't done their own shadow work. They're still pointing at them, what they're doing, and pointing fingers and coming up with a lot of really very negative stuff that doesn't help.
Yeah. Well, and the individual shadow work is important, because we've all had our part in those stories, whether you know it or not.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what I'm feeling and seeing, and why I think I'm really diving into those 2 chapters where you talk about the collective shadow, is that not only is there a pointing fingers, but there's a, that's just something I would never engage in. And we're actually engaging in that story, all of us, in our own way. And so I just think it's important to be able to do this work on your individual shadow, so that you don't take on the darkness, and you can understand. If I hadn't have done the work on my own shadow, I know I would be reacting and experiencing my own awareness of those stories differently.
Yes.
Instead, it's almost like a recapitulation of my shadow is what I keep thinking I'm going through, because it's understanding. You could easily get caught up in blaming that storyline or that narrative for your own shadow. Instead, integrating your own shadow, you can see the piece and the part in it, and be able to move past it.
Yes, exactly. And that's why personal shadow work is just so important. And we think when we're starting, we're doing it just for ourselves. Of course, what happens is we're doing it for the whole of humanity. Because when you withdraw your projections, when you own your own shadow and you take responsibility, you're no longer a burden on the earth. You're not blaming other people. You're not blaming the government or your mother or whoever, because you've actually done the work. And then, out of that, there's compassion and empathy. And you can be a much greater force for good than, finger pointing and blaming, and, talking about what's wrong with the world. How about talking about what's right with the world and what's right with, all the people that are in it? Even though he or she may appear as being kind of a negative, like, character or whatever, the truth is he or she is still the self. They just don't realize it. So that is the work right there, is to do the work on yourself and your own personal shadow, awaken, fully awaken. And you're already awake, you already realize. It's just that, you cannot own that until you've done the work on the shadow. And then as soon as you've done the work on the shadow, it becomes very clear. And actually, even in doing the work on the shadow, there's a seeing. And again, I can stand in my words, because this has been proven in my own experience and via the emails I've been getting from people who are just a few chapters into doing the work on the shadow, and they're having these huge kind of shifts and insights and seeing, and are already realizing and living in those experiences of the self.
I love it.
So it's incredible. It
really is. And you guys just have lots of like prayer hands and hearts and all sorts of things. We have a question from Rachel and a question from Riley. Rachel says, does lucid dreaming cause you to get less sleep or not as deep a sleep? So that's an interesting question. And Riley says, my goal, she said, and sometimes it goes the other way, not about being love, but being shadow instead, so that the light can be let in. So I think she was just commenting to what we were saying. There may have been, I don't see more, but yeah, so I'm curious about what you think about lucid dream, because you and I are both, I think, pretty intense lucid dreamers. So do you feel like you get less sleep or not as deep sleep? Like, what do you feel after you have a night of lucid dreaming?
Oh, I just feel incredible, because there's just so much energy. There's so much energy in a lucid dream, especially with a great being. I'm just, it takes me days usually to process what that has meant and what that is pointing to. And there's always an integration afterwards. I know, like when you've had dreams with His Holiness, Lisa, then afterward, it takes time to integrate, because the thing is that in the meeting, there is some sort of initiation, or there's a teaching, or there's a conveyance of some kind of greater expansion of energy. And that usually also coincides with being called to create something new, or step into something more fully, or speak to something, or work with people in a different way. Mm-hmm. So, that's certainly been my case. I have always loved lucid dreaming because of those things, actually. Yeah. And also because I feel more alive. It's like everything is much more kind of enlivened, and the energy is incredible, and it's just like you feel more fully yourself, in a way, I guess, is a way of putting it. And without any sort of restrictions, there's a freedom of movement that's wonderful, that you don't feel in the same way in a physical form. Yeah. So lucid dreams, bring them on, is all I can say.
I agree. Like, I don't feel drained when I've had a lucid dream. Like, the only thing that happens is that disorientation. I think there's like, sometimes I'm not quite back from that dream. Yes. And I'll feel very like out of time. Yes. All day, or for a couple of days. And I know my most recent one I talked about on a podcast interview with Erica about Gandhi coming in a dream. And it's been almost 2 months since then, I think. And it's still very much a part of my day-to-day. Like, the integration is definitely not complete. Like, I'm still processing through what that meant. So I think, you definitely don't feel tired, but there's definitely this out of space, out of time. Like, did I come back? Like, am I back?
Yes. Well, look, the other thing as well, this is really important too, to speak to, is that when you have a lucid dream with a great being, and he or she gives initiation or a teaching or whatever, there's the incredible Shakti that does require integration. At the same time, if you revisit a lucid dream that you may have had 20 years ago, for example, when I revisit the awakening, the Shaktipat initiation dream I had with Nityananda in 1989, it still conveys, even thinking about it, the Shakti is still the same. It does not come and go. It's not minimized in any way. It's still as alive and as powerful as it was when I was in that dream experience, because it's living energy. It doesn't come and go. Mm-hmm. That awakening power is very much alive. It's very present. It's really palpable, and it doesn't diminish in any way. And this is what is so incredible about having dream visitations with great beings, or even actually even reading them, reading about them. There's an energy that is very palpable, that is there, that can help shift your entire state or initiate awakening. And again, I can stand in my words with this, because many people have written to me and said that they received Shaktipat through reading my first book, An Awakened Life, A Journey of Transformation. Because I'm speaking about all these different initiations I had with these great beings, because the energy's still there.
Yeah. And I think we've talked about this before, but Robert Moss's conscious dreaming, there's so many great practices in there to take you back into that space too, and be able to connect with that. And I know you're working on a book about this dreaming, so I'm excited for that too.
In fact, I'm going to, again, I'm going to kind of toot the horn for Rachel Burl, because she's amazing. And she's going to help with the editing part when I get to that. But I'll probably put it on pre-sale. But the goal, and this just landed today actually, so I can speak more about that at the weekend tomorrow. But I'm going to probably put it on pre-order, and the goal is to get it out and published by November 15th. And the title of it is Say Yes, Wake Up in the Dream, A Practical Guide to Lucid Dreaming and Lucid Living. And I'm really excited about it. And actually, that book I started before the Shadow book. That was kind of underway. I think I'm on chapter 3 or 4. And then I was told, put that to one side and start working on meeting the shadow, and you have a month to do it.
I'm glad it happened. I'm glad you said yes.
So I said, really? Okay.
Raquel says, yes, that makes sense. Thank you. And I don't feel drained from a lucid dream either. I actually feel energized from them. April says, yay, I'm sure to your book, which I can't wait for. And hi, April, and hi, everybody out there that's listening. And yeah, I can't wait for I had a lucid dream about your lucid dream book, which we talked about. And so
yes,
keep it coming. So
yes,
I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and actually, while we're speaking about dreaming and sleeping and all of those things, what is worth speaking to is that I've had a few emails from messages from people saying that they've slept solidly for like 8 or 9 hours or something, and they still wake up exhausted. What is that all about? And I think we may have talked about this a little bit in maybe with a podcast with Taria, but yeah, I mean, that happens to me as well quite a bit. And with the most recent one, when I woke up, I think I'd had 8 or 9 hours sleep. It was, quite a long period for me. And I woke up and I was like, I still feel tired. What's this all about? And I asked Nityananda, and he said, yes, you've been working all night. There's a lot of work to do. And then I realized that what was happening was, I was working energetically to shift and, change things up and, also sort of integrate and process some of the new energy that was coming in. And then shortly after that, I got all these emails and messages from people saying, you visited me in this dream last night, and you visited me, and you came here and you came there, and you said this and you said that. And I said, yes, I remember. I do remember. I was working all night. So in some, I'm saying that to say this. In some cases, I remember very clearly going and working with people, literally through the night, and then in other cases, I don't remember a thing. It's like I'm completely gone. But if that is happening for people, what I really believe is happening in many instances is that people are being worked on during the night, during the dream state, to help trigger remembrance in the waking state, and to bring the light of the self, and also to bring the shadow to the fore, to help expedite and really speed up the whole process of awakening because of the state the world is in right now. And I'm certainly hearing that consistently from many people, that we'll get both of those things: a lot more lucid dreams, a lot more traveling at night and work being done, and then people saying that they've slept really well and they don't remember a thing and they feel exhausted the next day.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate. I actually got a message from somebody yesterday, which I haven't been able to write anyone back, so I'm so sorry, but it's been so crazy. But I got a text from somebody yesterday who said, you are busy because you came to me in my dream last night and this and that happened. And I've been getting a lot of messages like that myself, which surprises me because I've actually never gotten messages like that before. And that I'm visiting people in the dream state. And I'm with you. I've had some nights where, early, like usually I'm not a real late night owl these days, but I've had some moments recently where it's like 8 o'clock at night, like I just have to go to bed, and I'll sleep for like 12 or 13 hours. And it's just like constant waves of dreams and experiences and over. And then you wake up and you are just exhausted. So I can absolutely relate to you. And I think so many folks, there's folks agreeing here in the chat too. And Raquel says that her lucid dreams have really increased when she began working with you, Julie, and receiving your Living in Alignment courses, which are really beautiful too. And that's actually a great segue, because we've been talking for a couple of hours, and I think it would be great to give you some space. You do offer the Living in Alignment courses. You have 3 books. I'm obsessed with your Honoring Your Soul Contract course. I think I tell every single person I know about that. I think, and I'll just say this as my testimonial. I mean, for years and years and years, I worked with the Artist Way. And as a counselor and a coach and a healer, I would tell people, oh, do the Artist Way to connect with your creative gifts. And honestly, Julie, your Honoring Your Soul Contract course is by far the most incredible replacement for that, truly. Like, that's what I tell people to connect with now. If you need to connect with your creativity, if you want to open your sacral chakra, if you're feeling blocked or stifled, like, that course is just amazing, because it opens up things that I just don't think you realize until you're going through the process of that course. So I want to give you space to share everything you have to offer and what you have going on, what you're excited about, because all of us want to continue to learn and grow and connect in with what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thank you. Everything that you've just detailed actually is available on my website, juliehoyle.org. So you can go there and just read about, all those things. Honoring Your Soul Contract has been really amazing. And again, I was told to do it and really it's just kind of a different form and a different way of working with the awakening power. And at the end of it, you come out with a really beautiful painting, actually, that is uniquely yours. So that's really fun. And, it's easy, even if you don't think that you're artistic in any way, it's just accessible and really easy. So I really love doing that. I really, really love writing the Living in Alignment lessons every month and sending those out. We're now into year 5 or 6, I forget. But, essentially what happens is people that subscribe to that course are giving me permission to work with them during the lucid dream state, or even if they're not lucid dreamers, I can work with them on the subtle planes. And that's been really amazing. And, again, evidenced by what people have been telling me in their communications back to me. So, that's still fresh, and I love it very much. And of course, I'm loving the responses from the new book, Meeting the Shadow. I'm very excited about the new book that I'm also working on. And what else? And I absolutely, as you well know, I absolutely love every second of being here and sharing and being on this platform. It's an absolute gift. And I feel very honored to be able to sort of come here and share so much. So, I've got a lot going on. I've got other art courses as well that are really fun. One about sort of working with your emotions, which is, a fun way of working as well, and just playing intuitively. And then, I offer life purpose readings, shamanic energy readings. There's a lot. But essentially, it's really all about having those options as a vehicle for the awakening power, for the Shakti, and to help work on the shadow and to really own who you are and to live from that space rather than living, from out of contraction or, a feeling which is common, I think, that other people, especially spiritual teachers, know more than you, or gurus, these great gurus, that you look up to and think are amazing. And, I'll never get there and all of that. So it's really, I'm really here to stand in the truth that you are the truth itself. Your true nature is absolute awareness itself. You are that. And or source, or whatever you want to call it, and that is who you are. And I work from that premise, and I speak from that premise, and I point to that in everyone I work with, and it's an absolute joy, and it gives me incredible energy as well. I mean, what a gift to be in that space. So I think that covers it with respect to what I offer. There might be more, you know, that's coming into my in tray soon. I never know.
Oh, well, we just love you, Julie. I know I'm speaking for everybody who's watching right now. And for me, I just, the love and the respect and just the trust and the appreciation and the gratitude. I mean, it just extends infinitely to you.
Thank you. Well, I feel the same way. Otherwise, I really wouldn't be here. Honestly, I really, I'm very picky about where my energy goes, you know, because it has to be in resonance with truth. It cannot be otherwise. And, you know, and then that is also true with respect to the people I work with. Because the thing is when an email comes in from a new person, for example, I know before I even open the email whether that person is really ready to work with me. Because I honestly don't have the time to work with people that are just kind of like poaching or fishing, or, you know what I mean, or not really serious about doing the work. And that's fine too. There's plenty of people that, you know, they could find to help with, maybe, I don't know, finding a boyfriend or finding and I'm not discounting any of that in terms of one's humanity. That's really important. But I'm really all about supporting people to wake to the truth of who they are. And that's the bottom line. And that's obviously sometimes includes the story as well, because that's important. You know, improving the stories has value.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it does. We have to honor everything, every single thing. And so there's joy in everything.
There is. And there's so much joy in spending all this time with you. I mean, really, like I value it. I know everybody listening values it, and being able to hear what you say, it helps process. It helps process what we're going through, what we're experiencing. I mean, there's that need for that and for that support. And so I just can't thank you enough. We just can't thank you enough. And if you guys want to hear Julie's incredible story of awakening, you will be able to hear it on August 28th when we release Awakened Grace. Yay. Very excited. Yes. And so we've got a lot more information coming really in this next week about that, but I feel complete with my production plans. So Awaken Grace will be released on August 28th and be accessible to everyone. And it's a documentary about awakenings. And Julie's story of awakening is in there. And if you want to know more about it, the official trailer is live here on YouTube. You can just go to the homepage of Buddhist Biohacker. It's right at the top. It says Awaken Grace documentary series, and that's the trailer. And again, we'll have more to come. We'll be releasing the film at the end of the month, and then we'll be releasing everyone's individual interviews all throughout the fall, which I'm really excited about as well. And Julie, it's been an honor having you here, and it's a very special day. It's Power Day, and I definitely feel the energy shifts just from talking with you today and feeling the Shakti and the energy of the teachers and the beings. So thank you for everything.
Thank you. What an honor. And thank you to everybody that's joined us today, and all those people that, you know, listen later on. We really value you. We really, really, that's why Lisa's doing this, for all of you, to, you know, have this amazing, amazing community. So thank you so much. So if you have not subscribed, please do that. And please encourage anyone you think who would be interested in subscribing and hopping onto the platform to please join us, because this is what it's about. It's about awakening the whole of humanity. So thank you.
Hear, hear. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to everyone. And we are back next week on Tuesday, and we're actually back with Julie, I think, on Tuesday. So for her monthly Living in Alignment teaching, which is so fabulous. So we'll be back, and much love to everybody, and have a great Lionsgate today. And I love you, Julie. Mwah.
Love you too. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.